Hi guys, it's John here from Android Addicts, and this is a comparison between the Galaxy A34 and the Galaxy A54. So these phones have both recently been released, so I thought I'd do a quick side-by-side comparison, and you can then hopefully decide which one is the right one for you. Now these phones' specs are very similar indeed, but there are a few subtle differences which we're going to go through right now. So price-wise, the A34 starts at £300, whilst the A54 starts at $450. So that's about $300 or about $375 respectively. Now these are the 6GB of RAM variants, so they come with 128 gigs of storage, but you can upgrade that to 8 gigs of RAM with 256 gigs of storage if you so wish. Now they do also come in a variety of colours. You can see here I have the lime colour here on the A34 and the violet colour here on the A54. So the A34 also comes in violet, it also comes in graphite and silver colours, and the A54 also comes in black, white and also this lime colour, very similar to the A34. So there's plenty of variety there in colours to choose from. So let's just go over the design and the build of these phones. You can see here that they're almost identical. If you have a look at them face on, you'd be hard pressed to tell which was which. They also have a plastic frame and back, as you can see here, but the A54 has a shiny effect here with their sort of Glasstic, as they're calling it. Covering on the back, it's still plastic, but it's a shiny sort of version, which makes it look like glass, which to some people makes it look more premium. Personally, I don't think it does look more premium. I actually quite like the matte look of the A34 here. So the A34 is 3 grams lighter than the A54, so you're not going to notice anything when you're comparing each one side by side. I'll also put the measurements on the screen as well, and you can just compare. You can see that they're almost identical in every single sense, and both are IP67 water resistant up to 30 minutes for 1 meter of depth. So both phones come with a Super AMOLED display and they both support 120Hz refresh rate. The A34 has a very slightly larger screen, 6.6 inches compared to the A54's 6.4, and the A34 also has a higher screen to body ratio with 84.9% compared to the A54's 82.9%. Both displays run at 1080p, 1080 pixels by 2340, and they both come with Gorilla Glass 5 protection. So the A34 here is powered by the MediaTek Dimensity 1080 chipset, whilst the A54 is powered by the Exynos 1380 5nm chipset. So in theory, the Exynos is a bit more powerful, but that is yet to be seen in the benchmark tests. But both of these phones do have an octa-core CPU. The A34 has a slightly higher clock speed on its cores, whereas the Exynos is running slightly lower on its cores. And as I mentioned earlier, there's two variants, a 6GB and an 8GB version. Both of them do also have expandable storage with the microSD card slot, which can go into the SIM card tray. The camera on the A34 is the sort of U-drop style cutout, whereas the A54 has that hole punch. They both come with this triple camera setup on the back, which looks quite nice. Now the A34 has a 48 megapixel primary sensor, 8 megapixel ultra wide, and a 5 megapixel macro sensor. Now the A54 here comes with a 50 megapixel primary sensor, a 12 megapixel ultra wide, and a 5 megapixel macro. So they're very, very similar in terms of setup here, just with the A54 having a couple more megapixels than the A34, both in its main sensor and in its ultra wide. Both also come with an LED flash, as you can see, and of course they support panorama HDR, and they both have optical image stabilization on the main sensor. Now both of these also come with a massive 5000 mAh battery. Now they do only support 25 watt wired charging. There's no wireless charging at all on either phone, so that's a bit of a shame there and a bit of a missed opportunity, I'd say. That being said, the battery lasts very well on both. You can easily get a day's worth of use out of each phone. So I went out and took a few photos earlier on today, and you can see the results here. So you can see on this first photo that the A34 has really focused nicely on the foreground tulips here. The A54 was kind of focusing on the back. Now it was quite windy, so I do take that with a bit of a pinch of salt, but you can see both phones bringing out a superb picture here, and the colours represented very well on both, but I would say it's a lot more realistic looking on the A34. The colours are less sort of saturated, whereas on the A54 you can see here the reds are a lot darker than the ones on the A34. Now here's another flower, and I did a bit of a sort of close-up on here. You can see the quality on the A34 is really nice. Again, because of the wind, take it with a bit of a grain of salt, but it does look a lot nicer and more in focus on the A34 in comparison to the A54 here. Now this is a macro shot that I took, And you can see here on both phones, it came out nicely. Now there's more detail, it looks like, on the A54 here compared to the A34, but both came out reasonably well, but I'd say that the A54 looks a lot nicer in general, a lot more in focus. Now the blues are looking a bit more purple, I'd say, on the A54 with its Exynos chip compared to the MediaTek here on the left. But both phones did really well with the macro there. Here's a photo of some daffodils, and you can see here, really nice on both. A34 nice and in focus, slightly out of focus here on the A54. But if we have a look at this one here, we can really get in close and see quite a lot of detail on both cameras here. You can see again a slight difference in color on both phones, with the A34 being slightly lighter and the A54 being a bit darker here. You can see in the center of the flower. Okay, so here's another interesting one. So this was taken sort of looking up slightly at the sky, and you can see here the sky is completely blown out on the A34, where it's a lot bluer on the A54, which was a bit more true to life, I'd say. So the sky looks more natural than on the A34. If we look at the actual plants as well themselves, we can see it's come out really nice on the A54, but it looks like the A34 has been focusing on the background here, whereas the A54 was focusing more on the foreground. Again, these are just some random shots I've taken, so both look really nice, to be honest, and if you played around a bit longer than I did, then I'm sure you get good results from both phones. Now here's a really good one. This isn't a macro photo, but if you zoom in, you can see lots of detail here on this snail. Hopefully no one's squeamish who's watching this, but you can see here the details. You can see the eyeballs on the snail here looking up as it was posing for the photo. But yeah, the detail on the snail itself and the shell, really, really nice on both. And considering these are budget phones, that's really fantastic. And in fact, I've just seen what is probably an aphid or something on the back of this snail. It's definitely more in focus there on the A34 than the A54. But yeah, a really nice shot from both phones there. Here's another one, but this is with the ultra wide lens. And you can see here the difference in colors. The colors on the Exynos, again, are not quite true to life, I'd say. The green, believe it or not, is this really bright green here. But on the Exynos, it's looking a bit sort of washed out there. Better focus there on the tree though, on the A54 in the back and in the other tree behind it. Definitely slightly better on the A54 there. And again, more detail in the clouds, what few there were, that is, on the A54 in general. So the front camera on these phones is pretty good actually. I'm quite impressed here with the level of detail that you can get out of these. So don't forget, we have the 13 megapixel here on the 34 and the 32 megapixel here on the A54. And you can see there is slightly more detail here on the A54 in comparison to the A34. Now it's more interesting actually when I go to the portrait shot here. You can see how well these are both doing on the sort of cutouts. A34 doing really well here, and the A54 doing just as good as well. You can see here it's cut out nicely around the whole of the face and body. Maybe slightly blurry here on the A34 around but overall really nice for these sort of mid-range phones. Now I'll put these videos on the screen and you can take a look at them, but the color on the A34 is really true to life compared to the A54, which is definitely not true to life. The main part to look out for is the tree trunk, which you'll see here. So when I put it on the screen, you'll be able to compare the two, but the one on the A34 is true to life. Okay, so here we are with a quick test of the 4K recording on the A34 versus the A54. So these are recording at 4K 30, as I said, and it's quite windy here today, as you can probably see, so a good test of the noise cancellation. There's a bit of a colour difference I can see with my eyes here, so the A54 looks slightly more washed out, whereas the A34 is definitely more true to the real life colours. Test out the image stabilisation, they both have OIS. Before I start also, the A34 with its front facing camera, I don't know what was happening here, but my head was shinier than it normally is. Now that is not very good at all. I was disappointed with that, but the A54 picked it up absolutely how it was in real life. So yeah, that's one to look out for in the selfie video. And here we are with just a quick test of the front camera. You You see here the A54 picking up the hills in the background there much better than the A34. My head on the A34 looks very shiny, not quite sure why. Okay, so an important factor obviously in having a phone is the speed that it runs at. And these are running really nicely. I mean, they're smooth as anything, as you'd expect from a Samsung phone. And we'll have a look at games in a minute, but I just want to go over the benchmarks that I ran earlier and we can have a look at those. So you can see here the Geekbench scores with them performing very similar. A34 slightly better off with its single core, that is running at a higher clock speed obviously, whereas the Exynos doing better in its multi-core overall in comparison to the A34. Now the compute test here, Exynos winning here by good 600 odd points, so definitely better in the compute department for the A54. Here's some 3D Mark tests, and again, Exynos outperforming it compared to the A34 here, doing slightly worse with its 13.6 average FPS. Slingshot test, not too dissimilar to each other, but enough that the Exynos won in the A54 here with a score of 5,804. Antutu benchmark, again, the A54 beating the A34 by around 23,000 points. And the stress test here that I ran, you can see here the A34 doing really well, hovering around 75 to 80% for most of the test. Exynos here on the A54, however, is jumping up and down a lot. It actually performs higher than the A34 for a lot of the test. It does also drop lower, or a lot lower than the A34 in general over the whole half-hour test that I did. You can see here also the cores are sort of jumping around all over the place. Here on the A34, they're looking nice and stable. So the A34, I'd say, is definitely a more stable phone CPU-wise than the A54. You can see here also the test with the battery temperature getting up to just below 30 degrees here on the A34. On the A54, it did go above 30 degrees by the end of the test. So Genshin Impact runs really well on the lower settings. I have set it to 60 FPS on both. It runs as smooth as you'd expect on a mid-range phone. Pretty good, to be honest. A lot better than I was expecting, at least. Now, if you want to see a proper gaming test, then do let me know in the comments below and I'll do a proper gaming comparison between these two. Okay, so some very slight differences here on PUBG. On the A34, you can set smooth and extreme if you wish. You can also go up to HDR and ultra. On the A54, the maximum you can currently do is HD and high. Even if you go to smooth, the highest frame rate you can set is high. So what we'll do is we'll jump into a cheer park and you can just have a very brief look. So you can see here on both, it looks really nice and smooth. And again, if you want a gaming test, let me know down below and I'll do a proper comparison between the two. Move on to COD Mobile now. Okay, so you can see here COD Mobile on both is really buttery smooth. You can set the graphics as follows. So you can see here you can set it to max with low quality. If you go to high, then you can still have very high frame rate as well. So that's really nice. So Call of Duty Mobile, really well optimized for both phones, as you can see. So interestingly, the SIM card tray is slightly different on the A34 compared to the A54. It has one of the older style, sort of longer SIM card trays here, with these separate slots, whereas the A54 has the sort of double-sided one, so it's a bit smaller. Not that it really makes any difference at all. They're both obviously dual SIM, but it's worth knowing there are some subtle differences between these phones which you wouldn't necessarily see unless you actually took them apart. Now, both of these have stereo sound, so we will do a test from each phone. So surprising actually how much bass can come out of these little phones nowadays. But yeah, I couldn't notice anything particularly different between the two. So my overall thoughts on the A34 and the A54 is that the A34 is actually pretty much on par with the A54. So you're getting a cheaper phone with almost identical specs, just very slightly slower on the CPU, but the camera itself seems a bit more realistic compared to the A54 and the current update that is. They're both on the February update for 2023. So personally, I don't think it's worth spending the extra money on the A54 unless there's anything about the A34 that bothers you, such as the camera or one of the specific colors. But they're so similar, it's really hard to tell them apart or even pick them apart from that camera punch at the top. So If you're happy enough to have this U-drop style camera, just go for the A34, it's cheaper and it works almost as fast as the A54 with a slightly better camera. All the standard sort of games are optimized well for the MediaTek, so you don't need to really worry about the A34's processor when it comes to gaming. The Exynos may get slightly higher frame rates overall, but that's yet to be seen unless we do a gaming test. The only difference I have found between these two is that the A34 does not have the ability to set an adaptive frame rate. That's very strange. That means it's potentially fixed here at 120 Hz all the time, which could in theory mean the battery will drain faster than on the A54. However, that doesn't seem to be the case. We can see here, these were both charged up to 100% when I started my test, and the A54 is already down to 68%, whereas the A34 has 4% extra with 72%. But yeah, really great phones, fantastic screens, great cameras for the price, and yeah, compact enough and fancy enough to still look premium, like a sort of S-series phone, but without the premium price. So again, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.